Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for being patient. I still see a few people trickling in here, but we'll go ahead and kick everything off. So thank you to everyone, SHI and non-SHI customers alike, for setting aside some time today. My name is John Rohde with SHI, and we're here today to really gain a better understanding of a very hot topic as of late, being Windows 10. This really marks a major shift in the industry, which can cause some great advantages as well as some challenges for IT to manage these type of changes. So, as many of you know, SHI places a huge focus on Microsoft and our Microsoft customers. Our goal is always to educate, procure, deploy, and most importantly, help customers adopt new Microsoft technologies that they're evaluating. We are able to best do this by leveraging strong partners and strong partnerships such as Champion Solutions Group, who will be leading today's webinar. SHI has worked with Champion for a number of years now, and we're excited to communicate a unique automated process that they've developed to help customers get from A to B in regards to Windows 10. I'll start off by better introducing my role as it pertains to Microsoft, and then kick it to Tony Suffoletto and Dan Powers to do the screen share. So again, my name is John Rohde. I'm a Microsoft Solutions Executive, and really what that means here at SHI, I kind of bridge the gap from advising on licensing, making sure customers are in the right purchasing program, teeing up services partners and services resources to help deploy and migrate those technologies, and most importantly, provide training and pathways to help your end users adopt those technologies. So, Tony, I'll kick it to you to introduce Champion Solution Group.
Perfect. Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name's Tony Suffoletto with Champion Solutions Group. I manage the partnership between Champion and SHI. And, you know, we value this partnership. We've been working together for about 3 years now, and looking forward to giving everyone a lot of information on Windows 10 and also some good next steps going forward. So for those of you who don't know Champion, I'll be really brief on this, but we're based in Boca Raton, Florida, and we've been around since 1979. So, you know, long background, but, you know, we definitely find Microsoft is one of our better areas that we focus on, and you know, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Powers in a minute, but Dan and his team have really not only learned a lot about Windows 10 and why and everything behind it and the advantages, but also some great tips on how to get there the easiest. I'm sure many of you remember going from Windows 7 up to Windows 7 and probably have a few scars to prove it. So hopefully Dan and his team by the end of this call will give you some great information, and we look forward to talking with you hopefully after the webinar. One other piece, we will be recording this webinar and sending that out. So if you had some colleagues who couldn't make it, you will be getting a link for a recording. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Dan Powers, and again, thank you for joining us.
Greetings, everybody. Again, I want to reiterate what Tony and John had said. We appreciate you spending time with us today. I want to talk real quick about an agenda that we're going to go over with right now, and just recognize we have about an hour to go over this, so we can't deep dive into anything too much. But if you have questions, please type them in. I know everybody's on listen mode only. We will do our best to do a Q&A at the end, and for anybody who types questions that we don't get to, we will get back to you. If you provide your email, we have your registration, and when we put the replay of this webinar out on the website, we'll try to answer the most frequent questions we have. So for a quick agenda, we do want to go over just Windows 10 landscape, what's driving customers to move to the Windows 10, some of the obstacles you may have faced, and again, to talk about what Tony said, if a lot of you have remembered that XP to Windows 7, what were some of the hurdles, what were some of the issues you had, what's different today in Windows 10? That'll drive us down to the different types of upgrade paths. Something that I want to spend a little bit of time on is BIOS versus UEFI, and if you don't know what that is, hopefully by the end of this we'll at least give you a high-level view of what that is, and I highly suggest you take a look at it. We will then get into the Windows 10 readiness assessment that both SHI and Champion and Microsoft team up to help provide you, and we'll talk a little bit about what Microsoft's doing to help fund some of that. Of course, with the Microsoft funding, they're really trying to get people to adopt and move to the Windows 10, and then an overall Windows 10 adoption. So at the end of the day, it's not just moving your machines into Windows 10, but it's how to get your users to embrace Windows 10, the features, the functionality, and really get the best out of it between Azure, Microsoft Office 365, and so forth, and what it can do for your company. So we're going to drive in, like I said at the beginning here, in Windows 10 in the enterprise. I just wanted to talk about real quick on myself. I am at Champion Solutions Group. I am part of the security team. However, over the last year, we've really started helping some of our customers in Windows 10, and it opened our eyes to quite a few things and why we spent a lot of effort here. Windows 10 is going to be a little bit of an inevitability. It's coming. People are going to move to it, but hopefully we'll show you why this is a good thing as we move forward. So to start with that, I wanted to just bring up three quick things that we can talk about of what's driving customers to move to Windows 10. And it's unfortunate, but if you've seen Cloud Bleed and you've seen WannaCry come out and all these other things, this is a business by the bad guys. Malware, right? What's happening in today's environments. And Windows 10 is really addressing that. It's really bringing some of that security down to your endpoint, which is really where it needs to be in today's mobile environment. The stability in the OS, how much work Microsoft has done to really test, vigorously go through applications to make sure when they deliver a version of Windows 10, it is going to be stable for your environment. And then real quick, digital transformation initiatives. What does that mean? In the bottom line, it's how do people work today? How do I enable companies, workers inside of a company, B2B business? How do I enable you to really take advantage of technology today and work in this mobile workspace? So we're going to cover some of these Windows 10 features at a high level, and then we're going to get into the actual adoption and migration into Windows 10 and some of the lessons we've learned. So real quick, for Windows for Business, some of the great things you're going to see, and I'm not going to talk about everything on this slide. As we had mentioned, this will be available to everybody who is registered. You can download it from the site and so forth. But really what Microsoft is trying to do is to provide a safer and more secure operating system. Again, in the recent years, we all hear about it every day: malware, hackers, data breaches, DLP, all these things that are going on, and they're really trying to address it at that endpoint level. Everything from Windows Hello, which can now start adding biometrics to your login to help secure it, Device Guard, that's helping secure the actual machine and harden it from a malware perspective. But again, even after that happens, we know, and experts will tell you, even with all the steps you can put into place, you can still succumb to somebody clicking on the wrong thing, whether it's intentional or not, and having data leakage. So that's where we get into the Windows information protection. So all of these features here in Advanced Windows Threat Protection is all around securing your endpoint to make it as secure as possible, and if you do get breached, to limit what happens and notify you as quickly as possible. So that's a huge piece into Windows 10 and what Microsoft's trying to do. Of course, with that, they're also trying to be more productive. What does that mean? Better integration with Office 365, Windows Inc., Azure Active Directory join, being able to work in that B2B environment much tighter and cleaner than you could before. Being able to deal with mobile devices. Again, as our workforce has grown, we're much more mobile workforce than we have been 5, 6, 7 years ago. Everybody is on the move, and how do we address that from a technology standpoint? As we move further down, we can see they're trying to make it more personal. They're trying to get users really to embrace it, and that's where we have Cortana for Business, the Windows Store for Business, and so forth, to give users a personal experience with their desktop while keeping it secure and having that collaboration. And of course, if we even expand it further, Microsoft obviously sees it as a benefit for the Internet of Things, whether that's VR goggles, whether that's Windows phones, laptops, tablets, and so forth. They're really trying to position Windows 10 to be able to work on all of your devices across the board, and everybody's going to benefit from that, even if you don't get into some of those Internet of Things devices. It's just the level of effort and devotion that Microsoft's putting into this is going to benefit everybody going forward. So again, we don't want to spend too much time, but even Gartner reports a lot more people are adopting Windows 10 than they did Windows 7. Windows 8 maybe necessarily wasn't adopted greatly, and I honestly believe that was because of the issues people had moving from XP to Windows 7. It cost more than they thought it would be. It took longer than they thought it would be. There was a lot of headaches with it, and once they got to Windows 7, it was a decent platform. It was a new UI. And they really didn't feel a need to move to Windows 8. But we know Windows 10 is an inevitability. It's coming to everybody, and everybody has to address this. And one of the reasons we put on this webinar today. But also note that, and what I'm trying to show you here is that adoption to Windows 10 is actually gaining traction quite a bit. Right, and we know it's probably going to be the most widely adopted Windows platform that was ever released, right? And that goes without saying, but there's some driving reasons for that. Part of that is huge in the security space. As I mentioned in the previous slide, was in today's market, there is a huge need to control the security. And I just grabbed up a couple slides here. If you want to base yourself or go back to your management and say, hey, what's the benefit of Windows 10? Just realize that you can go back to the Department of Defense is spending billions, millions, if not billions of dollars embracing Windows 10. They find it to be a much secure platform, something that they can base their security posture off of and move forward. And quite honestly, even the hackers themselves that are out there, those bad guys, are reporting that it is harder, if configured properly, to actually bypass some of the security features in Windows 10. So these are some of the great things that you can benefit from it. And I know everybody on the call, you're either in process of looking at a Windows 10 migration, maybe you already started that adoption, or it's on your boards today, but we know this is coming. So here's some of the great benefits for it from a security perspective. If we take a step back and we look at the Microsoft options altogether, and where does Windows 10 fit into here, we can see how Microsoft has kind of broken this out, right? So we have Office 365. Between SHI and Champion are huge advocates of Office 365, moving your email, your contact management and stuff up into the cloud. It makes it easier on you from the long run, just from a total cost of ownership, being able to onboard and offboard people. Windows 10 is bringing in there some of that advanced threat protection, as I had mentioned, device guard, credential guard, all of these things that I'm sure most of the people on the call have heard of before and want to take advantage of, but there's a tighter integration between that Windows 10, that Office 365, and again, as I had mentioned, that mobility workforce. Everybody is now on the go, right? We don't really have those people coming into work from a 9 to 5 so much, but we have people traveling, we have people working at home, we have people working all over the place, and it's really a tighter bridge from that perspective. If we move over to the right, now we're looking at more the infrastructure. This is your back-end side of it, the management and operation side. We get into Azure Security Center. How do I control my Active Directory? How do I secure this down a little bit better? What is the advantage of moving to Windows Server 2016 and SQL Server 2016? Tighter security, tighter integration between all the products, and this is where Microsoft has really done an outstanding job of looking at the future and saying, where do we need to bring all of these features? And Windows 10, as you can obviously see, sits right in the middle of this. So again, just kind of walking forward through what Microsoft is looking at and what it's going to bring to you. So the Windows 10 defense stack, if people have heard about it, is really all about EDR. It's endpoint detection and response, right? So we think about traditional antivirus software, we think about malware today and why some of these deficiencies are out there. We really need to be able to protect our device as best as we possibly can, but we also need to make it threat resistant. We've all heard of zero-day attacks. We've all heard of these unknowns and how good these cyber criminals are being. And again, even sometimes it's not a malicious thing, but it's just data DLP of data being lost in your environment. This is where they've really taken advantage of this and said, you know what, we need to bring this back to the endpoint. X years ago, a lot of people really try to secure their firewalls, try to build that castle, if you will, in the environment, and protected everything inside. It still need to do that today, However, we realize that our folks that are working and to do B2B business and so forth, we have to open up. We have to be able to communicate with folks, and everybody is more in a mobile workforce. So we need to bring your protection layer all the way down to the endpoint, because it could be in the corporate environment, or someone could be sitting at Starbucks in the morning on a public Wi-Fi. I need to be able to extend your protection and your detection system all the way to that endpoint. So again, just walking over some of the features of Smart Screen, being able to have the analytics behind Windows, understanding where bad websites are, being able to understand when you click something if it's a possibility that you could be under threat of a phishing attack or malware. Windows Firewall has been improved, a whole new browser called Microsoft Edge, and again we come back to Device Guard, Windows Defender, and so forth. For identity protection, we're able to add biometrics into the basic login of the Windows 10 operating system, and we have something called Credential Guard. So again, as I had mentioned before, we have a limited amount of time to talk today, so I'm kind of breeze over these things, but Credential Guard is really a concept of, hey, I really am securing my endpoint, I'm trying to do everything I can to not be attacked or breached, but if there is a breach, how do I protect the most secure data that I have, which is your user information? That's what Credential Guard is all about. It's after somebody kind of breaks in, I'm still trying to get some extra protection against my user IDs and PMI data. And the same thing with information protection. So that's the idea that in today's world, people could forward their contact information to Dropbox or copy and paste different information outside of the environment, or even if you're doing onboarding and offboarding and people are starting to do a BYOD, not just mobile devices, but even with laptops and so forth. How do I understand what is company data, what is PMI data, and what is somebody's personal data? These features, which used to be third-party products, a little bit difficult to maybe configure and manage over the life cycle of your endpoints, is now being brought all the way into native features of Windows 10. So again, a great security talk. Again, we can't dive into each one of these, but again, we wanted to at least give you an overview of some of the things that you can expect out of Windows 10. And if some of these terms are new to you, I would urge you to look them up yourself, ask us the questions, and we'll do our best to answer it after the webinar. Moving forward, again, I put this slide up here because Microsoft, again, to their credit, is spending a lot of time trying to make sure the adoption of Windows 10 goes over extremely well. And some of the information that you can see here is how much of an effort that they put into vigorously testing not just the OS itself, not just that it runs on certain hardware that you may have, and they're working with their vendors to make sure device drivers work correctly, but just making sure that the operating system itself is extremely stable and the applications on top of it are extremely stable. So this is some information, again, which will be provided to you in this PowerPoint, which can be downloaded after the fact. But just to go over it without reading all of these things is Microsoft has literally spent a lot of man hours and a lot of time, and will continue to do so with their new model of releasing Windows updates and new versions of Windows 10 to make sure they go through this rigorous testing to make sure it does not affect your business at the end of the day. So if we move forward, we did talk about some of the Microsoft adoption and what Microsoft is trying to do to help folks adopt to Windows 10. So there's a couple things that they are offering here, and again, if Tony, if any one of you want to jump in a little bit, but what they're trying to do is offer Microsoft funding that you can talk to SHI or Champion to help. We work with Microsoft all the time to get these approved, to do assessments, to go into your environment and do education purposes, right? That'll help you understand a little bit more about what Windows 10 does, or to take a look at your environment itself and try to get an understanding and help build you a roadmap to adopt Windows 10. And under the right circumstances, when you put this information in with Microsoft, you can get approved that Microsoft will actually fund all of, or if not all of, part of these assessments, part of these training classes, because they're really trying to push the Windows 10 adoption. John, do you have anything to add on this?
Actually, Dan, it's Tony.
Oh, sorry.
We were just talking about it earlier in the week that At the end of May, we can start applying for funds in July, which July is the first month of Microsoft's year. So we can start applying. We've heard that the money has been replenished. So these types of assessments can start as early as July.
Excellent, and I thank you for that, because that's not my area of expertise, is the licensing side and so forth. But I have been engaged on it. So as I had mentioned, I am part of the security team on Champion Solutions Group, but over the last 8, 9, 10 months, I've really been focusing on Windows 10 because we've had customers that ask us for this. And in many of those engagements, we have had Microsoft funding to help us do, whether it was just simple assessment, whether it was the 5-day training class, or whether it was even a pilot moving a bunch of their machines into Windows 10, right, and really drawing out that roadmap. So thank you for that, Tony. So from there, I kind of did our cover of the Windows 10 features, and again, I did say it was going to be a high overview, giving our time. And now what we really want to focus with a little bit is, okay, we understand Windows 10, it is inevitable, there's some great features and you should be embracing it, but how do I get there? And I chose this picture because a lot of the customers that we originally engaged with and still do remember that Windows XP to Windows 7, and sometimes I think it was a longer road than they thought it would be. So we tried to engage our customers to figure out what the differences are and how we could help. So a couple obstacles to overcome, which I think that people need to understand, is when you did that Windows XP to Windows 7, nobody really cared about the 32-bit versus 64-bit architecture. They were more concerned of, will my 32-bit apps run on a 64-bit machine? But there wasn't a driving need to move to that. And of course, as we bring up today, BIOS uses UEFI. There was no talk about this because it really didn't exist, or it wasn't prevalent for people that talked about it. In today's world, as you're looking at it, and what I've found surprising as we engage customers, and again, when I say this, it could be a customer with 200 endpoints, and we've been in an environment where we've had customers with over 50,000 endpoints, is we still find a mix of systems that are out there today that could still be running a 32-bit operating system. We know from a hardware perspective, and we can get that data easy, but anything that's been around for the last 5, 6, 7 years, your hardware is capable of running 64-bit. So why is that important to you? At this point, X years later from that XP to Windows 7 migration, is the majority of your applications should be at 64-bit. They're the newer versions, and sometimes that 32-bit is really being superseded. It's being sunset. We can't run our 64-bit apps on a 32-bit machine, so we really need to get everybody over to that 64-bit side. The other big thing on here is people seem to understand, oh, I heard about Device Guard, I heard about secure booting, I've heard about advanced threat and all these great features of Windows 10. We want to look at this. What a lot of people don't seem to understand is that to make that happen, I need what's called a start of trust, or a root of trust, and that is built on UEFI, which is the Universal Enterprise Firmware Interface. So really what it's doing is it's kind of replacing your BIOS. So BIOS, you can have new versions of your BIOS, but if you think about it, the basic functions of what BIOS does, which brings your PC up, initializes your hardware, hasn't changed since 1980. Right? It really hasn't. UEFI is something that's been around for a while. It is not a Microsoft thing. It's not a Windows 10 thing. It's a hardware vendor thing, and a consortium of folks saying, we need to bring forward some capabilities at the hardware level for multiple reasons. And the best way I could make an analogy here is, I'm pretty sure everybody on the phone today has some type of smartphone. Whether you're an Apple fan or an Android fan or whatever it is when your phone boots up, it has a root of trust. That root of trust starts at the hardware level, and it comes up, make sure that it has not been compromised, and it starts initiating the OS. Again, I don't care if it's Apple, Android, whatever it happens to be, that you have a phone that when it's booted, it is informing you and telling you this is a secure device. So again, if you've heard of rooted or jailbroken, that means that root of trust has been broken. That has been lacking in the PC world for many years. Apple and so forth has embraced UEFI for the last 6 years. New machines that you have out there today are probably being shipped with UEFI, even if secure boot and stuff is not enabled. But it's bringing you that root of trust that is enabling you to bring up your operating system and say, at this point, I know this machine is not compromised. So again, when we talked about a properly configured machine running Windows 10 is why we can benefit from all those security features that I briefly went over before. So these are things to consider, and if you have not heard or understand what UEFI is, you can check out our website, SHI's website, or Google it on your own. I highly recommend that should be part of your desired state going forward. So as we move past that and we understand some of the obstacles in place, the next part of this comes down to what are kind of some of my options? And we have many options, but at the high level, it kind of breaks down into two. And that would be an in-place upgrade of your existing hardware, or you're going to do a fresh install. A fresh install could mean I'm getting new hardware, we're going through a hardware retention period and so forth, but I'm going to consider that a fresh install. And in place would be, I have machines out in my environment, I want to get them to Windows 10, I am going to keep that hardware and I want to move them as quick as possible. So an in-place upgrade, the pros, of course, is it's easier, it's faster, I don't have to worry about the user profiles, I don't have to migrate the applications, it's simply less expensive from a from a man-hour standpoint. The cons of this, of course, is if in your environment you still have 32-bit operating systems, I can't change my architecture. I can't move to 64-bit. So if I can't move the OS to 64-bit, of course, I can't run 64-bit applications. BIOS versus UEFI, again, in all the companies that we have engaged with, we always find a huge amount of machines that are still running in legacy BIOS mode. So we need to switch them to UEFI to take advantage of some of these security features, right? And we can't do that with that in-place upgrade. And again, some of that is secure boot, device guard, and so forth. The other thing we noticed, and it wasn't particularly on our agenda when we first started some of the Windows 10 stuff, but we've learned this over time, is existing problems move forward. We've been at multiple companies again and again where as they do an upgrade path, it will show us that if you constantly do upgrades, you could have existing problems that simply move forward, and the total cost of ownership of owning that endpoint actually increases. So a lot of our customers, even if they were capable of doing the in-place upgrade, they're already 64-bit, they're running UEFI, they kind of put a stake in the ground and said, hey, if this operating system, this endpoint has been out there for over a year, I want him to walk through this upgrade process. Why? Because if this endpoint is going to be in my environment for the next 4 years, its total cost of ownership to support it and manage it will actually be less. So it's actually something interesting to think about. From a fresh install perspective, what are our pros? We, of course, can switch from 32-bit to 64. We're doing a new install. Of course, that means all the software we put back down can be running 64-bit at your latest versions of your software. We can switch BIOS to UEFI, so we can start taking advantage of some of these Windows 10 features, which is secure boot, measure boot, early malware detection, and so forth. And of course, if I do go through this, existing registry problems, hard disk issues, and so forth, these are kind of going to go away, right? I'm not kicking the can down the road, if you will. The cons, what we found when we first engaged with this, of course, it's a longer process. It takes more time. In a lot of sense, when we first started, this was a manual effort. I might have to update people's BIOSes just to support UEFI. I got to walk around with some install disks or boot disks or so forth to make this all happen. So it costs more. We have to redeploy software, and then we get into, well, if I'm going to wipe your machine, I need to actually back up your user state and restore it. So these are some of the issues we ran into, and what we're happy to say is in our course of working with our customers, we were able to automate a lot of these things to bring that back to the same amount of effort it would take if you did it in place. So what we call is achieving a desired state. And everybody will be slightly different, but from the talks I said, I hope you realize that your desired state should at least be you want to run Windows 10, 64-bit operating system with UEFI supported. Now again, whether you do secure boot or device guard or all those other security features, that could be something you do after. It could be built into the process, but you at least want to be in a position to take advantage of these things if you need to. And again, real briefly on that, if you're doing PCI, HIPAA, and so forth, I believe in a short time, some of those features from the endpoint perspective, it'll actually be in those regulatory pieces. So if you're going through this process, you want to be in a place to support those advanced features sooner than later. So again, we talked about your hardware, your BIOS. Is it compatible? 32-bit operating systems. Do you know what you have out there today? If you looked at your network, do you know what that number is? Do your vendor, whether it's Dell, HP, whether you have a mix of that, is your vendor supporting on the models you have with drivers and so forth running Windows 10? And again, our user profile and current state, because at the end of the day, what we're able to automate is if I'm moving from that machine from a Windows 7, XP, Windows 8 to Windows 10, is we automate the process of capturing that user state, understanding the applications that are on it, re-pushing them over, moving to 64-bit if we had to, redoing configuration issues so that at the end of the day, in an automated fashion, the user can log back into their Windows 10 machine and have that same look and feel, if you will, environment, software packages, and support that they had an hour ago when they were running it under their older operating system. And understand that this can be a destructive process. If I have to walk through this and switch that UEFI, update your BIOS, and install a new machine, this is a destructive process. This is where all those man hours from doing it manually came in, and why the benefit of automation is going to be key to keeping this project under control going forward. So some of the things what we do from the champion side in SHI is we came up and teaming with Microsoft to understand what do we have to look at, how do we get to that desired state. So we define our desired state, we know where we want to go, we have to understand where we start from. So part of that, what we do is in an assessment, is understanding where your environment is today. Which type of machines need to be replaced, which do not support the minimum requirements for running Windows 10. Of those, what are the machines that we actually could do an in-place upgrade? And if we can do that, we certainly probably should. It's faster, it's going to cost you less money and man hours. But if we have to do the wiping, if we have to reissue the machine, it would be nice to know what that number is so we can plan out our roadmap going forward. And we can do this in a matter of hours at any site. Moving forward, some of the steps and lessons that we learned was we really have to understand in your own environment, for an example, is what is your hardware vendor makeup? How many models? Are you all HP? Are you Dell? Do you have a mix? How many models are you supporting? And do they work with Windows 10? Again, this is information that you need to be able to identify where you are so you could get to where you want to be. So hopefully that makes sense to folks going forward. And this is part of the assessment that we offer from that side of it. Moving forward, even into BIOS, now that we're going to switch over to UEFI, we really kind of have to understand at any organization, how old is your BIOS, right? What BIOSes support UEFI? At what version do we have to update it? We can also now automate this. This was also a process in the past, may have had to been a manual thing, that you had to walk around, boot the machine off a flash drive, upgrade the BIOS, just to get it ready to move to the new operating system. So again, this is where we can understand in your environment and keep track of it, what machines are still in BIOS mode, what's the effort that we have to do to push them to UEFI mode, and can we automate this? Can we do it where we flashing your machines where we don't have to send someone out and sneakernet, and that's what we can do. One of the other features we did, and again, it wasn't originally in some of our roadmaps that we worked with, but is really understanding the warranty information. So we have a process where we could start looking up and gathering this information on your endpoints today, regardless of what vendor and model and so forth it is to understand what is the life cycle of these machines. Because if I come up to a bunch of machines and I know either they have to be replaced or they could be in place upgrade or not, is if they're coming to their end of life, if their warranty is ending and they really should be hardware replaced in your environment, why do you want to spend the man hours of moving these things to Windows 10 where they really should be under a workflow of new hardware? New hardware getting shipped from the vendor, 9 times out of 10, it's already going to be at least set at UEFI. We could deal with the secure booting and those things after the fact, but it's already going to be in a position to take advantage of that. So again, having that information at your fingertips is crucial. And for a lot of our customers, the biggest thing they raved about afterwards was, just the ongoing management of these endpoints long after the Windows 10 adoption is put in place, is being able to have that warranty information just for their planning purposes and moving that data into a CMDB, whether that's a ServiceNow, a Remedy help desk, or so forth. It was just great information that they love to have. The next side of this that we kind of move into is, I'm curious of the folks out there, could you answer today what your user profiles look like at your endpoints? This was something that was very surprising to me as we got into this, is the amount of data that sits down at these endpoints, right? And this opens up a whole issue that we could talk about for PMI data, what's actually out there, you know, what are you spending for backups? But if we kind of bring this all down to the Windows 10 side of it, if you're not doing an in-place upgrade, whether we're doing a wipe in place or we're getting new hardware, I have to deal with the user state, you know, their bookmarks, their data, their My Documents, all of this information that's out there. What we found kind of amazing throughout all of this is the size of user profiles. I honestly thought these would be fairly small. I thought a lot of people would have data either in a VDI environment or backed up on their NAS devices and so forth. But some of the pictures you're seeing, there's no company names here, but these are real examples of assessments and workflows that we have done at organizations. And we've literally seen profiles that are in the 30 gigs, 40 gigs, and probably the biggest one I saw was 1.6 terabytes. So again, if you think about it just about Windows 10, whether I'm going to do a wipe and restore your machine or whether I'm replacing it with a new piece of hardware, how much time is it going to take for you to do that to 1,000 endpoints? With our assessment, we could really kind of come close and calculate this is the effort it's going to take because we have this data at our fingertips. And quite honestly, when we start getting into those huge user profiles, it usually opens up a different story where you probably really want to look at what are people storing out there, why are they storing it out there, and some of the cost savings can really go crazy from backups to support and so forth. But again, this is just something that we have learned for doing this over multiple customers, that understanding the data that sits on these endpoints is actually pretty crucial, not just from a Windows 10 standpoint and migration, but even from a security perspective. So moving forward a little bit, of course, we come down to the applications. Really trying to get an understanding of what applications are in your environment. So if you go through this automated process, and we are going to do that in-place upgrade, or even if we're bringing in new hardware, I have to understand what applications are running in your environment. This leads to a great story in multiple ways because I can find various different versions of software that you're running. We can really start tying down, well, what version should we be running at? I want to be, at the end of the day, I'd like everybody to be 64-bit applications at least at this version level, right? You're going to take this time to get a consistent endpoint, if you will. This is part of the process that we deal with. We also try to look at your applications and pump it through like AppDNA or some of these tools to validate that these applications, if you move them from what they are today right back under Windows 10, are they supported under Windows 10? But this again will help us with the roadmap to understand the applications in your environment and what effort it's going to be basically to move this information under Windows 10. This is also where we do a lot of transformation. We move those 32-bit apps to 64-bit apps because we know our desired state of our Windows 10 endpoints at the end of the day are all going to be 64-bit operating systems, and they can support your Windows 64-bit applications. So this is some of the stuff that we offer in that assessment standpoint. And again, going back to Microsoft and best practices is really to get an idea of what your applications are in place today. From there, we can deviate multiple ways. We've had multiple different customers that have chosen to really take this opportunity to narrow down the applications in their environment. And one that I just thought was particularly interesting is in their move to Windows 10, they define their base software, and that's your Microsoft, your Office, Outlook, and all those base things. Of course, for some different environments, they looked at SAP or certain applications that a department needed. But all the extra stuff, what they ended up doing is actually putting them into a self-service portal. And they told users, and communication is key, is we are going to move you to Windows 10. You're going to have your basic software that everybody runs. You're going to have the mission critical software that your department needs. Any optional software at this point, you can go to this link. Here's a self-service web portal, and you can download the application after your machine is moved to Windows 10. The beauty of that story that I thought was amazing is 6 months into it, 6 months into most of the organization moved into Windows 10, less than 71% of the applications were reinstalled. So at the end of the day, what did that mean? They had a much tighter endpoint, they knew what applications were out there, and they were really going back and kind of alleviating and not paying for software maintenance of a lot of software that, quite honestly, really wasn't being used anymore. So again, you can take advantage of all these things, and I point them out because I know during this Windows 10 migration, this is not, you know, a simple project. This is something you probably have been planning. You know it's going to cost you some money and man hours. You probably want to look at all of these different aspects to make sure that as you walk through this process and you are spending man hours and time, that you get the most benefit out of this and not just moving people over to Windows 10. So hopefully that makes sense to folks there. So again, time is money. We all know it. What we've been able to do over this last year, and we're getting better and better at it as we do it, is being able to really identify what are the features under Windows 10. What is your, what we call the desired state? Where do you want to be? Understanding where your environment is today, and being able to run automations, being able to come up with multiple workflows that is a repeatable process to move you and adopt to Windows 10, and quite honestly, that you can continue to run after. Because even after your environment is all Windows 10, in 3 years from now, you're still going to be doing that onboarding, the new users, you're going to be offboarding, you're going to hire new people and so forth. You're still going to be provisioning systems based on roles and what that user does. And what we're looking at is not just giving you support or a tool to adopt and run Windows 10 today, but actually to embrace the software and to leave behind to let you do lifecycle endpoint management of your devices long after Windows 10 has been achieved. And we've been getting better and better at this every time. And one just bottom example I threw out there, we did have a customer, and it was approximately 7,400, 7,500 endpoints that they looked at originally doing it the way they traditionally did it was going to take them an incredible amount of man weeks, and they thought it would take them a year. We were able to move at their change management pace, but we were able to accomplish the same thing in approximately 8 man weeks, just through the automation, just because we had clear identification of where we wanted to be, and of course where we were today, and developing those workflows and doing a repeatable automation. So again, at the end of the day, I'm looking at folks out there, and I hope you understand that you really want to achieve your desired state. And again, I keep saying that desired state, it will be different for everybody, and you could even have multiple desired states throughout your organization. I think commonalities will be Windows 10, 64-bit operating system, and UEFI kind of leaving BIOS in the past. Now, whether you take advantage of all those other great Windows 10 security features, secure boot, device guard, and so forth, you are at least in a position to do so. And you may find that if you're under PCI or have POS machines, hey, we're going to have a desired state for these devices, and your normal desktop will have this device, and maybe traveling or laptops, for example, you're going to embrace BitLocker or some type of encryption to help you find that those mobile devices, if lost or stolen, or at least have that layer of encryption in there, right, to protect your data. And we can run reports and understand your compliancy as we move forward. So I know everybody's on mute, and I'm talking like crazy here, and there's probably some questions that we'll get to, but I'll move forward just a little bit. And again, this is probably very difficult to read for folks looking at their monitor on the WebEx, but just the idea that we've come up with multiple workflows from that point of view of understanding where you are and are we doing in-place upgrades. How do these workflows work? What are our default workflows? What if this is a new piece of equipment? How do we get it into place? And it's it's highly customizable, and we do this almost for every client. We start with a default set of workflows that we've created, and we usually deviate a little bit because our process is very flexible to do so. So again, I urge you, no matter how you're looking at adopting Windows 10, is to really take some time to identify what your desired state would be, understand what Windows 10 can give you from a software and security and productivity standpoint. If you have any questions, reach out to your partner, whether it's Microsoft, SHI, Champion, or so forth. Really understand what your options are, and then also understand where you are today. And I think that's the highest things I'm trying to get to today. But we are here to help you. As Tony had mentioned, and we mentioned before, there are a Microsoft funding, which their money is being reallocated coming up. So if you want to take advantage of this, I highly suggest you do so. You could get Microsoft to help fund a partner to come in to help you identify what are the features that we've been talking about, to really understand what they are. They can do a proof of concept, and they can pay you up to $10,000 for a vendor to come in and actually run through your devices, your environment, and show you what that roadmap would look like. All the way to up to a $50,000 funded project by Microsoft, where they're saying, okay, you're ready to move to Windows 10, you understand what your desired state is. We can fund you up to $50,000 to actually start moving your devices in this direction, because Microsoft is highly committed to getting everybody to adopt Windows 10. So coming off of that, one of the other things I would mention is, again, SHI Champion, we're not just trying to show you a tool or a process to move to Windows 10, we want you to help adopt it. So some of the other things that we look at is that training. I can put Windows 10 on all your devices, but I can also confuse your users. How do they take advantage of this? How do they work with Azure Cloud? How do they work with Office 365? And we started coming up with training for that as well, whether that's instruction-led, whether that's on-site, or in this case, they are tutorials that we can run in your environment. So as users adopt that Windows 10, they can start clicking like those wizards that you're used to, those professors. And hey, I used to do this way under Windows 7. How do I do this under Windows 10? Or here's a new feature called Cortana. I'm not sure how to use this. How do I take advantage of it? And some of that is built in to some of the process that Champion had created as an adoption to help your users really take advantage of the investment that you put in front of them. So again, I'm just trying to complete the whole picture. It's not just helping you move to Windows 10 and deploy it out there. It's really you want to embrace and empower your users to take full advantage of it from a productivity standpoint, and quite honestly, we can't forget from a security standpoint. We want to make sure that users are secure. Again, being from the security side, I'll put my security hat on for a minute. I deal with a lot of things from SIMs to firewalls, next generation, this and that, and at the bottom line, it's the fingers on the keyboard that is your best line of defense. And you really do want to educate and arm your end users to understand what potentials are out there, what tools they have to take advantage of, and that is the best possible thing you can do from a security standpoint. So Tammy or anybody on the line, I know I've been talking. Does anybody have anything to add at this point?
Dan, no, I don't. Usually I've chimed in 4 or 5 times, but I think you've really covered it today. I think at this point we probably, I think Tony may have been taking questions as we go. I'm not positive, but maybe we could answer a couple because we've got just a few minutes left today.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, please just chat them in and we'll read them out loud and Dan can answer them.
Or Tammy will. Just kidding.
Yeah, Dan, this is John Rody. I actually have one question. I believe, you know, one of the most important things in doing these testing and assessments is sometimes customers' home-built applications. How does Champion, you know, help ensure that those are going to work properly in Windows 10, and how can we, you know, augment or update those applications to be compatible?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, I mentioned one of the tools we use because some people ask App DNA and so forth. So the great feature of that is the known applications, right? And very quickly I can identify a huge chunk of your applications in the environment and give it the thumbs up or the not sure thing. When you get into those homegrown apps, that does take a little more testing. Some of the tools out there can do it because what I have to do is point at your package build, and it's then going to go through looking at your DLLs, what makes up this application, and can give us a good idea of, hey, is this compatible with Windows 10? And it can even give you some information around security. Hey, you're using an old .NET on this application, and while it might run under Windows 10, it's not really secure. So it gives you some of that. But to further your question, when you really get down to, and we've had a couple folks did this, and the recent one I can think of is a POS system. It was a homegrown POS system. So of course, some of the tools that we would use, I didn't have anything, that just came out of the gate and said it was good to go. We could interrogate, look at some of the DLLs, look at some of the framework they're used to build it, and get a decent understanding from a security aspect, and do those libraries, are they supported under Windows 10? But at the end of the day, if you do have a lot of homegrown applications, you're still going to have to go through a Q&A process, right? And that needs to be added to your roadmap. So understanding the applications you have out there, understanding, hey, do I have a lot of these homegrown ones and so forth, it is going to affect how long it takes you to migrate and move to Windows 10. So from that perspective, we can assist, but I would never say I can be 100% give you a thumbs up. You are going to do some regression testing and making sure that, hey, this works under your desired configuration state of what you adopted for Windows 10. Hopefully that long-winded answer makes sense.
Definitely does. Thank you.
Hey, Dan, this is Stacy. There's some questions online that I can go ahead and read out for you to answer.
Okay. See, I'll do my best.
All right, so I'm going to go in order in which they have been received. So the first one is from Ricky regarding Windows 10 features. He said, regarding Windows 10 features being announced, are these Windows 10 only features or preferred to be used in Windows 10 and not Windows 7?
So it depends where that information came from, Ricky. I understand the gist of your question, but I don't know where the information came from. So a couple things that, and I'll say this just quick in overview. You do want to understand what the features are, right? And some of them are really cool. Cortana, being able to do Bing searches, all of these things are really cool, but I also want you to take your own time and understand that when you turn some of these features on, whether they're Windows 7 or Windows 10, is you are providing and you're signing up to send data back into Microsoft, right? And again, I don't want to paint Microsoft as the big brother watching you do everything. I don't think they're reselling your information or anything of that nature. They're doing it to help your user experience. But I do want to point out, I'd be amiss if I didn't, that you do want to understand when you turn on some of these features, and again, Apple does it, everybody does it, is when you turn on some of this, you are giving your browser history, what you like to do, how you interact with the computer. You're giving this information up to Microsoft, and it's one of the reasons that when you go to your web page or you go to the Windows Store, it suggests things that you're like, oh my God, I was just thinking about that. Why did it know? Well, because it's tracking you. Again, I'm not trying to paint this as a big brother type of thing, but understand that when you do enable some of these things, you are authorizing them to track some of the things that you do, whether that's location, whether that's how you browse the web, whether how you interact with applications. So understand that, but some of the features that we talked about from a security standpoint, some of these are in Windows 8. Device Guard and so forth was really tried to be introduced in Windows 8. A lot of those do not exist in Windows 7. So again, hard to answer that question, Ricky, to 100% because I don't know when you're talking about the features exactly what you're referring to, but I think in general it brings up a great point that as you are looking at embracing Windows 10, what are those features, right? And I urge you, whether that's to engage with Microsoft, SHI, or Champion, is to really maybe have a sit down and maybe, you know, really engaging and saying, hey, what should I do if I turn these on? What's the ramifications? What am I giving up? What am I getting? Why would I turn these features on or off? Hopefully I answered you. I know that probably wasn't the answer you were expecting, but I did the best I could given the question.
Okay, question number 2 is from Mark. Windows 10 constant update downloads are a major issue, especially in retail. Does Microsoft plan to address this for business environments?
They do. So, and again, I may screw up the terminology here, but you have like Long Branch, you have, and I am going to screw them up because I knew this question would come out, and I know the answer, but I always mess up the acronyms. So you're correct. So what Microsoft is trying to do there is to, instead of releasing a bunch of updates, you know, little things all the time, they're trying to do a balance that says, okay, we're going to commit as we do these what they call rings of updates, is we're going to push it out to a core set of people. They're going to make sure it doesn't break applications, right? So they're trying to walk this tightrope of, hey, when we deliver this to you, we're trying our absolute best to make sure it doesn't cause you harm, right? Of course, the upgrade's going to happen, and we all know it's going to be a big upgrade and so forth. But above and beyond that, that it's not going to cause application issues or cause productivity issues. However, you are absolutely correct. When you look at any organization, right, and this is where, again, engage with Microsoft Champion or SHI, is what are your options? You know, should you go with Pro? Should I go with Enterprise? Do I go E3, E5, or so forth? You can use that, if I got the terminology right, long-term service branch, which gives you up to almost 10 years that says, hey, I am a POS, right, in your example. These are systems that I need to keep locked down. I need to be compliant for regulatory issues. I don't want them to change, quite honestly, unless there's just a huge bug like a heartbleed or something. They need to be stable. And you can defer and keep away those upgrade parts that are, hey, a new upgrade come out, you can take advantage of it, but in 30 days, if you're running this version or Pro, you're going to get it no matter what. And so unless you're a home user, I highly recommend that you do Enterprise. Now, whether you do the different versions of Enterprise, again, that is something that you really need to get a little knowledge of, and you may have a lot of your desktops, laptops running Enterprise E3, but for your POS terminals, you're probably going to do, I think it's now called Enterprise E5, right, which really gives you much more flexibility of denying those updates. The nice part about that, at least at the moment, is if you do deny them, and let's say we do it for 4 or 5 iterations, is I don't then have to upgrade to, you know, version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5. You should be able to go from your long-term service branch all the way to the new version, so your downtime and the impact to you will be as minimal as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I know we only got 1 minute left here, so wanted to make sure and wrap up the call and leave everyone with some action items to be followed up on with your dedicated account executives. So as Tony and Dan mentioned earlier, Microsoft offers those programmatic funding options such as Windows 10 POCs and other similar type engagements that will replenish in July, but there's certainly no need to wait. SHI and Champion have some pre-approved Windows 10 assessments and planning engagements ready to go. These can be paid for out of pocket or by allocating your planning service day. So if there is any interest, please let us know when and where you would like to start. In closure, Tony, Dan, and the entire Champion team, thank you. I know I took a lot away from this webinar, and if at least one other person did, I would say that's a great use of time. And last but not least, thanks to every individual that set aside an hour in their busy days to learn more about deploying Windows 10 and the SHI Champion approach and partnership. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.